What's going on, everybody? I'm Jay, the Reform Puerto Rican dude. Thank you so much for watching this video. Today, I'm going to be reacting to Sophia Galvin's detransition story and how she ultimately came to faith in Christ. One of the things that's interesting about her story is that um, she found Christ, or Christ found her, after she detransitioned, which is, I'm not going to say that that's not possible. Obviously, it is. But typically, when you hear of someone detransitioning, they usually come to faith first. So that's kind of interesting. Now, if you don't know who Sophia Galvin is, she is the founder, excuse me, of the Rainbow Redemption Project. Let me see if I can show it to you guys here. And basically, what they do is that they offer um, resources for people who are looking to detransition, and specifically, they hope to share the gospel with them, right, so that they might be able to know Christ. So, basically, here's Sophia, and like I said, she is the founder. Uh, if you want to look at her story here written out in depth, you're more than welcome to. Obviously, you want to go to rainbowredemptionproject.com. But it's a fascinating story, and we're actually going to go through a lot of it today, because what happened is that Sophia actually was seeking to um, find satisfaction in herself, right? And again, we're going to look into all of that. We're going to hear it straight from her, how her life was changed because of this desire to accept herself, but she couldn't find satisfaction in herself no matter what, and she had all kinds of issues. And very fascinating story. But specifically, what is most interesting is her coming to Christ, right? Because these type of people, a lot of them nowadays, unfortunately, they just go deeper and deeper into this darkness. And so it's quite unfortunate. Obviously, it's quite sad, but praise God, right, that he rescued her. And so she recently posted this video about her redemption story. Let me see if I can show you guys something, because it's pretty interesting. The Redemption Project has actually been around for a bit now. She's even done interviews with like Ali Beth Stuckey and some other well-known Christian YouTubers and things like that. But the YouTube channel itself, where she posted this video, is not all that new. Let me show you something here. Sorry, I keep having problems with my throat here. But let's go ahead and take a look at the YouTube channel. So if you look here, it actually says, can you guys see that? Yeah, you guys can see that right over here. Joined June 18th, 2022. So that was what, like, right now we're in March, so 9 months ago. And if you look at the videos, we're going to look at this one right here. I kind of saw a little bit already, well, most of it, but I just wanted to add my comments in there. But if you see, there's only two videos. So they really haven't done much yet. And it's actually gotten quite a bit of traction. Her first video, How Jesus Saved Me After Detransition, which we're, like I said, we're going to look at, has 87,000 views just 1 month ago that it was uploaded. So obviously, this is kind of a big deal. But it's a big deal because I think a lot of people, even though, again, most people still who transition, unfortunately, don't know Christ, don't detransition back to what God made them out to be. A lot of them are waking up and realizing that this is a sham, that this is a lie, that this is not something that ultimately is going to be for their benefit, right? And so I don't want to keep on saying things and, and put my own biases in here. What I want to do is share Sophia's story, or let her share her story with you guys. But I will be commenting here and there as we go through the video. So let's go ahead and set it up. And I think I want this view better. Yeah, that's better. That way you guys can stick around with me. All right, here we go.
Hello, my name is Sophia Galvin. I'm the founder of the Rainbow Redemption Project, which is a Christ centered resource for detransitioners. I'm a detransitioner myself, and I began to transition to become a man when I was 17 and a half. I detransitioned when I was 20, and when I was 21, I received Jesus and I gave my life to him. So, the point of this video is to give my story in a way that's not to appease an agenda, that's not to appease any individual person, but to share from the heart my experiences and what God has done in my life. So, to begin, I was born and raised in Miami in a Cuban family, very Cuban culture. I'm half Cuban actually. But that was the environment that I was raised in, very conservative environment.
So I just want to right off the bat here. I live in essentially Miami. I live in a place called Hialeah, which is like 97% Cuban population. Um, and she's right in saying something. Cubans are extremely conservative. So for her, for any Cuban or any person of Cuban descent to get into this kind of stuff is just unheard of here. Like this is alien to us in terms of when I say us, I mean I guess the Hispanic culture in general, but especially Cubans. Um, it's not that this stuff doesn't happen here. So Miami, if you're not from Miami, Miami's kind of interesting. It really is a melting pot of sorts, right? Especially for Hispanic culture, but it's not exclusively Hispanic. There are pockets of like, white people and black people, especially. There's not too many white people in Miami-Dade County specifically, but um, this stuff, and I'm not trying to make it about race or ethnicity or anything like that. I'm just saying that when it comes to leftist liberalism, wokeness, all that kind of stuff, LGBTQ plus, that usually happens among the non-Cuban pockets in Miami. The interesting thing about Miami, and again, I'm not going to go off into this too much, but I want you guys to kind of know have some context so you understand where her story is coming from. Um, Cubans don't do that. Okay, like Cubans, and most of them are either Roman Catholic or agnostic or whatever. But regardless of what their faith isn't, or faith is or isn't, I should say. One thing is for sure, they don't do that, right? Like even to be gay in the Cuban community is very very frowned upon, even amongst the most left leaning Cubans. Now that's changing, right? Because a lot of the U.S. culture has influenced some of the ones that have been here longer, but it's very still pretty rare. It's pretty rare that there's enough issues or there's other kinds of issues with the Cuban culture just because of coming from the Cuban regime, right? The Castro regime and how how life has been over there, where you kind of get used to the government doing everything for you, and so some of the newer Cubans um, aren't quite used to the idea of like we work hard and we earn our keep, and you'll find that more in the old school Cubans. Like they're very much like conservative. um we gotta work hard, we gotta earn our money, nothing should be handed over to us. But the reason why I'm telling you all this is because when she says that she comes from a Cuban household, for her to go into anything related to LGBTQ or trans or any of that stuff, that's really, really, really rare. So anyway, I just wanted to point that out. I'm gonna go ahead and let her continue.
As well. So when it came to being a young girl, it was challenging from the things that I saw around me. A lot of what I saw was women being abused and women getting put down and women feeling like they didn't have a voice. And I guess I always kind of had this sense of boldness within me, relatively speaking, of course, and a desire to point out injustice where it is. But I felt like as a woman, I couldn't really do that, or I guess you could say as a young girl from what I saw around me. I did dress a bit as a tomboy as a child. I believe this was also due to some traumatic things which happened to me, which I don't really want to get into, but
Okay, so oh, I paused at a really unfavorable look for her. Well, it's okay. It's just a pause. um, so she says that she used to dress like a tomboy when she was younger, and I just want to point something out. Okay, when you hear the stories of a lot of people who transitioned and then detransitioned, they talk about how, yeah, I used to, if it's a guy, I used to dress like a girl when I was like 5 or 6 years old, or if it's a girl, right? She'll say, yeah, I used to dress like a guy when I was however many years old. I want to be careful with this because I think it is generally stranger for a boy to want to dress like a girl than a girl to dress like a boy. Here's why. When kids are small, right? What they want to do is just go run around and play rough and this and that. And that seems to be kind of the same story for girls. I remember when I was little, right? Like girls just as much as boys would want to play hide and seek or, tag or dodgeball or any of those things. But as we get older, we start changing those interests, right? Like the boys still kind of want to play sports and be rough and this and that, and the girls are kind of like, well, we want to do other things, right? And not that girls can't be, softer and gentler even at young ages, but they can kind of play a little bit more with boys. All this to say, the reason why I'm saying all this is because just because a girl is a bit of a tomboy, even when she's older, doesn't mean that she is going to be, or she should be, right? Well, they never should be, but it doesn't mean that she's going to be gay or any of that stuff. And I remember, I'm 35 now. I remember when I was um, a kid and a teenager and all of that. Um, it was okay for girls to be tomboys, but nowadays, over the last few years, anytime you have a girl that dresses like a boy, the almost immediate assumption, especially by people who have been influenced by the left or are on the left, is, oh, she must be a boy trapped in a girl's body. And this, I believe, messes people up so badly. And that's why we're having so many people do this whole transition thing. I'm not saying that's the case for every single one of them, but it certainly doesn't help. And so people just need to be careful and not jump the gun. In fact, they should never do it. But not jump the gun in assuming that this person is going to be trans because this people weren't trans before, and girls could be tomboys once upon a time, and they would end up being girly, right? They would grow up, grow out of it to an extent, right? Maybe they still like some traditionally more masculine things like sports and things like that, but they still, you know, um, want to marry and have kids, marry a guy, and have kids, which is the only marriage, really. Let's be honest. Um, but nowadays, the lunacy of all of this just makes people think like they hear it so much that they start thinking maybe I am trans. And it's because of this craziness that we are affirming left and right. Anyway, let's go on.
basically these traumatic things made me feel very uncomfortable in my body and in myself and expressing my femininity. I also struggled with same-sex attraction a lot, which made me hate myself because when I was around girls, I would feel the attraction and I would feel immediately that it was wrong, but it's like there was no escape from it.
Okay. So she said that she was partially or part of the reason why all of this happened to her, right, is because she was abused. She didn't want to go into detail. But then she talks about she struggles with same-sex attraction. That is not a coincidence. That's not a coincidence. I believe that a lot of people, most people who deal with this kind of stuff, the abuse or they've been abused, and so that abuse has um confused them and misguided them to a place where, maybe it's looking for acceptance from your same gender and love from your same gender, or fear of the opposite gender, those kinds of things. And so, um yeah, yeah, this stuff is dangerous, but it's usually happening. I mean, let me put it to you this way. Ask somebody who is trans if they were abused as a child. I mean, I don't have statistics, so it's not like I'm gonna give you a specific number, but I wouldn't be surprised if it's a high number that say, yes, I was abused as a child. Kind of like the same thing with prison inmates, right? I think it's like 90% of them or 80%, something really high, that say, I didn't have a father in my home. I grew up in a single mother family home, or something along those lines. Um, when you change the way that a person is supposed to develop, right? Um, when you expose children to sexuality when they're not supposed to be exposed to it, when they're not ready for it, um, when you expose people to any kind of family that's not one father, one mother, it it messes them up in all kinds of ways. And that's not to say that they're not totally depraved, right? Humans are sinful, but there are some sins that just take you further and further into the darkness. Everything that ultimately happens in this world is because of sin. Everything negative, I should say. Everything negative and damaging and hurtful and sad ultimately happens because of sin. And this is not an exception. Her story, her story is because of sin. Her struggles have been because of sin. Not exclusively her own sin, although certainly, as we'll go forward, we'll realize that her sin had something to do with it as well. But it started with the sin of other people. And you know, we don't know, again, we don't know specifics. She won't talk about it, and that's okay. We respect that. But you can speculate, and if you see these stories long enough, you kind of see there's a pattern to them. And it's usually sexual abuse and all kinds of, anyway, I'm going to let her go on.
So I internalized that as well. And so I that was my childhood. That was elementary school for me. Middle school was interesting. I went to an all-girls school, and it was very challenging for me because of the same-sex attraction that I felt. I was only around girls, especially going through puberty with all of those hormones that were flowing through me. The attraction started to become more pervasive, I guess you could say. And, you know, of course, women are very touchy. So I would be around women and women would be touchy with me, well, young girls. And I felt kind of like I had to put on this show of like, oh, I'm actually not attracted, if that makes sense. Um, I had to hide this. I had to pretend like it wasn't something that I was struggling with, even though in my family it wasn't necessarily something that was wrong, but something within me. I
So, um, I forgot to mention this earlier, and she's talking about it now. She sensed that it was wrong from the beginning, right? Like she mentions, when I had this attraction to other girls, like I knew that something was wrong. I sensed that something was wrong. And this speaks to what the Bible talks about, right? Romans 1, 2, and 3 is kind of talking about the condition of man and what we know and natural revelation and all of this. The law of God is written in our hearts, right? We know right from wrong. And it's funny because we sear our consciences as we grow up, especially in a culture that we live in now. I know that I've had things that I've had to kind of relearn and revive in my conscience because I was desensitized to it because of just the type of exposure that I had to certain things when I was growing up, when I was younger. And I remember when being exposed to certain things, like when I was younger, I would think, "Oh, this is wrong. Oh, this doesn't feel right," right? That kind of thing. But as I got exposed to more and more to them, it didn't feel like it was wrong anymore. I didn't feel that sense of conviction and tenseness of like something's wrong here and we shouldn't be doing this. It just became kind of like second nature because our hearts become more and more hardened to the truth, right? We sear our consciences and unless God intervenes, it just gets worse and worse and worse. So let's go ahead and go on here.
I knew that there was something wrong with it. And so I kept silent about it for a very long time, but it came to a point where it was like it was boiling up and I felt like I couldn't be quiet anymore. I was very tormented with the guilt and the shame that I felt surrounding it. And so I remember one night, you know, crying out to God. It's like, God, please take this away from me. I don't want to be gay. If there's any other way, please show me. And I felt like he didn't answer me. And I even looked online trying to, find am I actually gay or is this just like hormones or am I just comparing myself to other women? Because I do believe that that was it to a certain extent. I compared myself a lot to the women around me. Um, but that's kind of what I was experiencing at, 13 and then going on into high school. I ended up coming out when I was 14, and it was pretty well received by my peers at the time. I think that a lot of it was the fact that I was very feminine, so they didn't necessarily feel like I was going to be predatory or prey on them, which was my fear that it would affect my friendships that I had, but it didn't, thankfully. But at that point was when I really began to strongly believe in the LGBT policies that they were fighting for at the time.
So notice what she's saying. She's saying, once I became accepted, right? Once this was affirmed, then I started feeling strongly about it, right? Like this was the right way. So this kind of points to what I was saying, right? Like at first you know something's wrong. You know that what you're doing is just not right because again, the law of God is written in every single man's heart or woman. Um and it's funny how as we are as see the left wants to do something, right? You ever heard of normalize, X, Y, or Z? Normalize gay parenting, normalize whatever. Well, of course they want to normalize it because it's not normal. But they want to normalize it because that's what the Bible talks about. Hardening the heart, searing your conscience. Um Basically going in a direction that denies the truth that you know inside of your heart. And the more you affirm it, the more that people cheer you on and you look around and because here's the thing, even though we know right from wrong at the same time, we love sin, right? And the more we get exposed to it, once we can overcome that law of God written in our hearts, right? The conscience bearing witness against us, um, we just sort of ignore it and we love it. And the thing that used to make us uncomfortable no longer makes us uncomfortable, but we just give in to the love of it 100%. Deeper and deeper we go into the darkness.
like speaking about LGBT topics in school and such things. I really was feeling that, especially with all of the clashes and the social justice movements going on at the time, because that's when I was 14 years old. So that was back like in 2014. Um, I was really feeling that because of what I struggled with when I was young, the shame and the guilt and the condemnation. I didn't want other people to experience that. But as I started to become more entrenched in the community, the the greater I would say I began to become indoctrinated and eventually, come out as trans. Of course, that wasn't the only thing though. Um,
Just one quick thing, because she talks about being indoctrinated. The left loves to say that Christians brainwash their children, but I beg to differ. It's the left that brainwashes children, that indoctrinates them. Why? Because Christianity, all that it does is tell children, listen, that conviction, that truth that you know inside your heart, right? Because of the natural revelation that God has given, here it is. It's Christ. All we do is reveal what we already know in our hearts, right? But it goes beyond natural revelation. It goes into special revelation, which is revealed in the scriptures, right? You want to make sense of what am I seeing here, right? Like everybody knows deep down, there's a creator, there's right and wrong, but what do I do with this information? Christianity gives you the answer, but the left says ignore what you know to be true inside your heart. Let me show you what is actually true, which is not true at all. But let me show you what you're really going to like, which that part is true. You really are going to like it once you can overcome the truth that we all know, right? The 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 natural revelation that has been revealed to every single human being. So, yeah, she's 100% correct. It's brainwashing. It's indoctrination.
I was of course developing as all young girls do, and especially growing up in Miami, I was preyed on a lot because of the way that I looked. I was, tall and I was a pretty girl. Um, so that was also something else that made me feel very uncomfortable in my body, and it made me feel like I had no value. And I, again, didn't know how to even speak up for myself when these things would happen because I always had this fear within me that there would be negative repercussions to me actually standing up for myself because I never saw it around me and I was never able to stand up for myself in certain toxic situations that I had been in before. As well as I struggled a lot with my mental health. Um, when I was 15, I started cutting myself. When I was 16, I went to therapy and I got on psychiatric medication. It was pretty bad. There were times where I would have to go to the hospital because my anxiety was so high. The panic attacks were so bad that I felt like I couldn't control them. I was in a lot of torment. Also, school was very stressful because I it was pushed on me to achieve a lot. Um, I felt like this really heavy weight on my shoulder, always on all fronts. And I felt all of this torment that I couldn't escape. I really don't know how I got through that time or most of my life. Of course, now I know it's God. But
So, it's funny because this is true of all sin, right? But the more severe the sin, the worse it's going to be. Look how she's looking for satisfaction in giving into her sin, but it's not working. It's actually doing the opposite. It's hurting her more. And so what does she do? Instead of going to, obviously she didn't know at the time, but instead of maybe thinking, maybe I shouldn't be giving into my sin so much. Maybe that's the problem. She instead looks for other things, right? Like psychiatric help and medicine, and because she's not satisfied with herself. She's unhappy with her life. But nowadays, a psychiatrist would rarely say, maybe the problem is that you are um, doing things that are unnatural. Maybe that's the problem. Maybe you need to stop doing that. And it would be even rarer to say, or to hear, I should say, from a psychiatrist. Maybe what you need is Jesus. But that's exactly what she needed.
But that's kind of everything that was boiling up in my life up to that point, 16, 17. So when I turned 17, I became the president of the LGBT club at my school. Things seemed really good for me because I had a high GPA. I was most likely getting a full scholarship to school. Of course, internally, I was struggling with a lot, but on the outside, it seemed like everything in my life was good and together. And then I had a girlfriend at that point, which I found very confusing because I didn't understand, like, what roles are we supposed to play? Like, this doesn't really make sense to me. And then, especially, like, when we would go out in public and be preyed on, I felt like I had to take on the protector role. And so these things kind of made me feel like I had to masculinize myself and be the man.
Hmm. Yeah, yeah, because God already designed it a certain way, and what you were doing. And I'm not saying this in a. I'm not trying to reprimand her or anything. She knows, obviously, now. Praise God. Um, but what these people are doing is doing something that's not natural, because there's a natural order to things. Men protect, and women comfort, right? And not exclusively. I mean, obviously, women can protect their children, men can be comforting to their children, um, or they can help each other even. But there's a primary role for each gender, and so when you get into all this alphabet people kind of stuff, um, you don't really you're kind of negating, right, the roles. It's kind of like hiring an electrician, or maybe hiring two electricians, one to do your plumbing and the other one to to actually do the electricity, right, or to deal with any electrical wiring or anything like that. The electrician has been assigned to do the plumbing is not going to know what to do. He might be able to do some things, more or less. He might be able to figure out some things, but it's not what he has been trained to do. It's not what is, I guess you could say, natural to him, right? And so this is what she was realizing at that time.
I guess you could say. And so I started to take on that identity. And that's really when the dysphoria, I would say, fully manifested itself from, like, hating myself, being depressed, being anxious, hating my body, kind of came together into gender dysphoria, and I began to want to be a man. So that's kind of how it started for me. I wasn't fully sure about it at the beginning. I remember looking up on the internet, like the American Psychological Association, what the diagnostic criteria was. And so, because the criteria was so vague, I was able to automatically see it and be like, yeah, well, this is what I'm struggling with, because what it says on the American Psychological Association website is that I am gender dysphoric, and if I have gender dysphoria, I must be trans. But I still, in my heart, wanted another way out. So I remember one night I was in my room and I cried. I remember I cried all night. And I did just as I did when I was 14, when I was coming out as gay. I said, God, please, if there's another way, show me another way, because I don't want to do this. But again, I felt like I had no answer. And so I ended up coming out and I dove right in. So this was in around 17 and a half when I, made the decision to dive in. I started socially transitioning, which means that I started dressing as the opposite sex, and I started flattening my breasts and everything to give myself the appearance of a man. I ended up socially transitioning. And then when I was 18, I started medically transitioning. Right when I turned 18, I got my hormones from Planned Parenthood. And Like I said, on the outside, it seemed like my life was going really well. I was going to school, I was working, I had a full scholarship to school, but on the inside, I was about to break. And, I was very quick with the name change. I was very quick with the testosterone, and the impact that the testosterone had on me, I mean, it just knocked me down.
So, one of the things that she says is that, well, she got pills from Planned Parenthood, which is already a red flag. But besides that, right, and we could talk about Planned Parenthood and all the problems there, including the fact that they're murderers. Um, but she did everything on impulse. And here's the thing: even if she had gone to a psychiatrist, I I doubt that nowadays psychiatrists are, even those that would agree, like, we've taken this too far, because they're afraid of the backlash of being accused of hate or intolerance or whatever else the woke left has to say about people. Um, they just they're too afraid, right? So even the ones that disagree would probably are just going to just be like, just here, go ahead and get your pills and get the therapy and or the the procedure and get whatever you want so that you can be happy and so that I don't have to lose my license.
The little bit of strength that I had to move forward every day, it was completely gone from me. I didn't do well that semester in school. I started getting into drugs and just having all of this anger, and I just started becoming a different person. And so at that point, at the end of the semester or the beginning of the next semester around January of that year, my ex-girlfriend broke up with me. And so in the midst of the breakup and school being very stressful and other personal things I was going through and the testosterone, the horrible impacts that that was having on me, I just I broke down. And so I started sleeping around with men, and eventually, like, a month later, I was raped. So this was, like, February 2019, my spring semester of my freshman year. And that was the ultimate thing that just I couldn't continue in my life the way that I had before for years, kind of being able to carry myself through. I had to stop. So I stopped school at that point and I started working full time. Um, but eventually, over like the course of a year, so like this is around 19 years old, I even had to quit working because that's how mentally and emotionally afflicted I was. And also physically, to be frank and to be honest, I had a lot lower energy and my life was a mess. I guess that's the best thing I could say. I became
Your life becomes a mess the deeper and deeper that you go into sin. So it makes sense. And it's sad. And it's funny how most people don't ever learn that. Maybe I'm the problem. Maybe me giving into all my sin and all my sinful desires is the problem. Most people don't learn that.
addicted to sex, further addicted to drugs. At some point, I went to a psychiatrist and to a mental health professional again, trying to receive help. They put me on pills, of course, and therapy. That didn't help me. And so, after being on the testosterone for about a year, I had my breast removed. I remember after the surgery looking in the mirror and thinking, this did not help me.
Of course, it didn't help you. What should have helped you was the psychiatrist who should have, instead of putting you on pills, said, hey, maybe you're not supposed to be trans. Hey, maybe we should revisit this. But again, everybody's too scared nowadays. Everything is about appeasing the woke left, or you're called a bigot and hateful and blah, 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 blah.
That was probably the lowest point in my life. Well, one of the lowest. There were a lot of low points. Um, I just kept going, continuing in the negative behavior and the negative patterns. And eventually, when COVID hit, I began to really think and reflect on my life. This is at 20 years old. You know, is the testosterone good for me? Is this actually helping me? I kind of miss being feminine. Like I would have these thoughts and these feelings that it was hard to vocalize because it's like, well, how am I supposed to admit that I just made a huge mistake taking testosterone for 2 years and removing my breasts? How is that something that I can just openly admit after I led everyone to believe that this is who I am beyond a shadow of a doubt?
So now she's in this uh, part of her story. She is regretting not only what she's done, but she went so deep, right? And so um, she was so committed to this that now it's she started to look bad, right, in front of her family and her friends and this and that, just because she said, "This is who I am. I am not coming back from this. This is who I am." And now, because of that, she is paying the consequences, right? But maybe it was her pride, right? Or maybe it was shame, or maybe it's both pride and shame that's keeping her now from coming out and just saying, "You know what? I made a mistake." Um, because she went so deep into it that it's like, how do you go back to people and say, "I made a mistake"? We as humans don't really like to admit that we're wrong. That's a fact. Like we just don't like to admit that we're wrong. But that just goes to show the sinful nature that we have, because we would rather look good and double down than actually say, "Hey, you know what? I was wrong and I need help or forgive me," or whatever it might be. So,
So I was struggling with that internally, but it came to a point for me where I was just like, I can't live like this anymore. So I stopped the testosterone. That was very challenging because I quit cold turkey and my hormones were all over the place. And of course, having to deal with all the trauma that I had been through in my childhood, all of the trauma that I went through over the last few years because I was just, I was living fast, not even thinking about the things that I was doing, just trying to get through the day. I had to deal with all of that on top of mourn the body that I used to hate, but now missed and wish I could go back to. So it was very challenging. It was, of course, it was horrible. It was absolutely horrible. I was actually Baker acted at that around that time, like a month or two after I made that decision.
so if you don't live in Florida, the Baker Act, and by the way, I come from a psychology background, so I know, when she's talking about the DSM and gender dysphoria and all that. Maybe I should probably explain that a little bit more, but the Baker Act, basically, to make it super simple, is if somebody seems like they're going to cause harm to themselves or other people because they have some kind of mental issue, essentially they can be, I believe it was, you could be held in a psychiatric hospital, or you can be detained for up to 72 hours. I believe that's what it was. And in the meantime, um, the state of Florida will essentially pay for your treatment while you are um, while you're Baker acted, right? And I used to actually work in a hospital where people were Baker acted all the time for self harm and this and that. And a lot of people weren't actually there because they were going to self harm. They were just there because they knew they would go get a bed to sleep on for a few days. So um, it's I understand the intention behind it, but like most leftist policies where the government tries to do what the government is not supposed to be doing, it's actually kind of a huge failure. It doesn't really it's like a band-aid. It helps in the short term for people that truly have like psychiatric issues or mental issues, but it's just a band-aid. It doesn't really do anything long term. So, just wanted to give you a little bit of detail of what she means when she says she got Baker acted.
I was forcibly put into a mental hospital. I started cutting myself again. At that point, I didn't know what else to do with my life because it's like For so many years, all I wanted was just to feel full and to feel loved and to feel like there was a purpose to my life. And I chased after it. I chased after it in the wrong ways, but I genuinely I was trying in the only way that I knew how. Nothing to no end. And so, not knowing what else I could do, like I had done quite a few times in my life, I laid down in my bed, I looked up, and I said, God, please help me. I can't do this anymore. And I had no reason to think that God would answer me or to even believe that He was real, but something in my heart just felt like only God could help me.
That is what people know to be true, that there is a creator, that there is a God, right? When people are put in their most desperate situations, that's when they want God. Now, at this point in time, I don't believe that she had any love for God in her heart, but she could kind of stop repressing the truth about God, because what happens is that when we go deeper and deeper into sin, it's not that we don't believe in God. We say we don't believe in God. When I say we, I mean humanity, right? Who goes more and more into their um, depravity, who gives in more and more into their depravity. So I'm talking about like atheists and agnostics and that kind of thing. They love to deny God, but as soon as they actually need something, they're like, "Oh, that's right. There is a creator, somebody who created me. Maybe he can help me." Right? And so as soon as, let's say, he does help you and you get out of it and he doesn't change your heart, then you're just going to go back to like, "Okay, cool. Whatever. I don't actually believe in God. It was just a coincidence that I got saved from that terrible situation that I was in. I just got lucky." You whatever lies you have to tell yourself to keep doing your sin that you shouldn't be doing. Um, and so that just goes on to uh, build up a case that's just going to store up more wrath for yourself on the day of judgment, right? Like the day of judgment, there's more and more evidence against you. So therefore, there will be more wrath against you, right? Now, everybody's going to be in hell equally. Some people are going to have it worse than others. It's going to be horrible for everybody, but some people are going to have it worse than others. Now, fortunately for her, we know that obviously she gets saved. So let's keep listening because she's about to get into it, I believe.
And so I ended up, like, it was about a month later, there was another girl who was a detransitioner. She talked to me about Jesus. And I had thought about and considered many other spiritual paths, I guess you could say, but they didn't make me feel whole and they didn't really give me what I was looking for. But when she started talking to me about like having a relationship with Jesus, it was something that I hadn't heard before. And something in my heart just really it resonated with me. And so Jesus and pursuing him and finding out if he was real and the truth became the center of my life for the next few months. So this is about at the end of 20 years old, maybe just turning 21. And it was challenging because there were people in my life who did not agree or support my decision to pursue Jesus. But despite that, I had to, because to me it was like if Jesus isn't real, there's no other point to me even existing.
That reminds me of when Jesus is with the crowd, and I don't remember exactly what it was that he said, but Jesus was kind of it's funny because we think of Jesus as this loving person that just welcomed everybody. And of course, Jesus is loving, but Jesus would say things that would just scare people away. And so there was a point where all the crowds left him. I don't know if it was because he said that you must eat his body and drink his blood, or I don't remember. It was one of those things, right? Like he would say a lot of things that would scare people away and be like, this is a hard teaching. But the point is that eventually everybody left him, and Jesus turns to his apostles and says, "Will you leave me also?" And Peter says to him, "To whom will we go, Lord? Only you have the words of eternal life." And so she kind of is doing the same thing here, whereas like people are pushing back against her, but she's like, he is my only hope. Where else am I going to go? And so this goes to show that when she heard the gospel from that young lady who had I think it was a young lady who had detransitioned, it goes to show that God had opened her heart and given her new desires, right? Because she wasn't looking for God before this. She was looking for satisfaction in all the wrong places. But all of a sudden, now her interest is in Jesus. Now it's like this is my only hope. And I think that's kind of what has happened to a lot of us as Christians. I can say that definitely that was one of my things. Like I used to find satisfaction in my sins, and when I first became a Christian, converted, um, I used to have this war going on in my mind. I mean, I still battle with the flesh. Obviously, we still sin, and so we have to battle with that. But it's not as hard because when I first became a Christian, it was a battle. It was a constant battle, but I at the same time, in my heart, I had this desire of like, I need Jesus. He has to be um my everything because he is my only hope. So I resonate with what she's saying there, even though it's not the exact same experience. I wasn't transition. I never did that, but you get what I'm saying. Like it's ultimately a heart issue, and that's very relatable. So let's go on.
It's just, again, something in me that longed just to know. And so, of course, I'm getting to know him. I'm having all of these crazy coincidences and things that keep happening to me. I have just moments where I would feel the Holy Spirit just come over me, and I would feel his love. I would just like, I would start crying because it's just like he was breaking through that lie that was placed in my head that he hated me. Because I struggled with being LGBT and all of these things, I just that lie, I think it was, out of everything I had been through, that was the worst thing, is the belief that God hated me. And over those few months, he broke that down, and eventually I ended up giving my life to him, which was the best decision I ever made for sure. And now I'm at a point, where I can never deny his existence. He's done so much for me just over the last year and a half ish. I was on psychiatric medication, which I wanted desperately to get off of, and he helped me get off of it.
I just want to say one thing, and like hearing this part um, is so beautiful to me because I've been a Christian, like I said, since I was 17 years old. She's a lot closer to her moment of being born again than I am. And so I remember thinking things like, he has done so much for me. How can I deny him? Right. And as you grow in your Christian walk, you become wiser and more knowledgeable in some things. But I don't know if this is true for everyone, but for me, one of the things that has happened is that it's almost like God showed evidence that He is working in my life early on, right? And so I couldn't deny Him. But as I grow in my knowledge of Him, it's almost like, and I'm not saying that God speaks outside of the Bible. I'm not hearing voices, so nobody be concerned. But it's almost like He's showing me, you've seen that I love you. You've seen that I am working in your life. You've seen things happen in your life that you can't explain outside of me. Um, you've seen how I've given you new desires and where I've led you. Now just walk and follow me in faith and trust. Right. And so as you grow, at least this is my experience, as I've grown, I've seen less and less like miraculous sort of things happen in my life. And so sometimes you forget, right? Like the things that God did in your life early on, where you say, wow, God was watching over me, God was leading me there. Because you kind of, take it for granted a little bit when you're um, walking a while with God and you're not consistently seeing, you know, amazing things happen. But that's why we walk by faith and not by sight, right? Like at some point, and I don't want to get into the whole like charismatic signs and wonders kind of thing, but I'm just saying like if you're constantly looking for signs and confirmation, right? How much faith do you actually have? Like it should be enough for you to say, "Wow, I've seen God work in my life. Let me not be like the man who looks in the mirror and then walks away and immediately forgets what he looks like. Let me remember what God has done for me." Starting with and ending with, honestly, Christ dying on the cross for me. Now, how do I know that applies to me? Well, I've seen God. God has changed my desires in my heart. I've seen Him work in my life. He's given me everything that I've needed, and all kinds of things. So, even though my life hasn't been perfect, right? Because I'm not claiming, oh yeah, my life has been perfect, therefore I know that God has worked in my life. No, absolutely not. But in spite of the things that have happened in my life, I can say, well, God has been working in my life, and this is what she's saying, right? And so she's saying, because of that, how can I then deny Him? But it's important for us who are a little bit more mature in the faith, right, to not forget how it all started, how it all began, and to continue to remember the gospel and remember what God has done for us. Let me go ahead and continue here.
I was unemployed. I could barely make myself breakfast in the morning. And now I'm going back to school and I'm running an organization all by his spirit. He's completely changed my life. He's changed my mind. He's changed my emotions. He's changed the way that I see others.
All right. So I think we're going to wrap it up here. And you guys, I mean, we're pretty much done with the video, but you guys can go check it out. I just want to do some final comments. Notice what she's saying now. He's changed my life. He has changed my mind. He has changed the way I see other people. Um, Oops. That's what God does in a Christian. That's what God does in our lives, in our hearts, right? He gives us new desires. Because before, what we used to love was our sin. We used to love our everything that was ultimately hurting us and other people. That's what we used to love. But now we love Him, right? We pick up our cross, we follow Him, and it's not a burden, right? We can and I'm quoting the scripture here for those that don't know. We can hate our father and mother and brother and sister and everybody else, not literally, but um, prioritize Him above everyone else because He has given us everything, right? There's nothing in this world, even our own family, our own friends, etc., that can satisfy the way that He can. And so, praise God for Sophia's story. I'm gonna go ahead and put the her website in the description as well as the link to the original YouTube video so you guys can finish. Again, it was only like a minute and a half, but whatever. You guys can go ahead and finish it. So, guys, thank you so much for watching. Let me know what you think in the comments. And if you find my channel helpful, if you've been watching my videos and you have found them interesting and helpful, and hopefully what this is ultimately doing for you is that it's helping you to be more firm in the faith, to be able to defend the faith, to give a reason for the hope that is in you. And so if you find these videos helpful, go ahead and subscribe. All right. And if you guys have any questions, by the way, I have a new email thanks to Brantley McDonald, who you guys are going to meet pretty soon here because we do a different video with him, or I'm doing a different video with him on the new upcoming movie Cessationist. But thanks to him, I have a new email that you guys can contact me if you have questions. j@reformedrican.com. Again, j@reformedrican.com. So, guys, thank you very much for watching. Until next time, God bless.